This is my exotic motorcycle collection, and today we'll discuss how much it really costs to own these bikes. This is a 2023 Aprilia RSV4 base model. I purchased this bike back in January of 2024. I've since put about 1,600 miles on it. I've done all the maintenance myself on this bike. It's gone through a host of modifications that I've all installed myself, but we'll get into the details of that later. Surprisingly, this bike is quite different from the Panigale V4 and Panigale V2, but a great bike nonetheless. This is my latest purchase, a 2023 Ducati Panigale V4. I purchased this bike back in July of 2024, so just like the RSV4, technically one model year old at the time of purchase, but was brand new. As you guys can see, it's gone through various modifications, but since I've only had it for a few months, it's not as modified as the RSV4. So far, I've put about 1,100 miles on this bike, and I have had the dealer do the servicing. Last but not least, the 2021 Panigale V2. This is actually not my bike anymore. It did transfer ownership here very recently, but I've got it here in the garage just temporarily. 3,354 miles on this one. I did buy this bike new in 2021. Instead of me blabbing on about the V2, let's just enjoy some Panigale V2 vibes. Today we'll talk about initial purchase price, modification cost, insurance, fuel economy, and maintenance. So I want to be clear, the point of this video is not to show everybody how much money I have or how much money I've spent. That's not the point of this video at all. I can promise you guys, I don't have hella money. I don't make a bunch of money for a career or anything like that. I can promise you guys that. Where this is coming from is I get a lot of comments of people asking me, how do I afford all these bikes? How much is the maintenance? How much is this? How much is that? What do I do for a living? And I just want to be transparent. I want to talk about all the costs associated with owning these types of bikes. And once you see those numbers, I think it helps a lot of people make a determination as to whether they can actually afford one of these or not. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of information coming from people who have never owned a Ducati, never owned an Aprilia before, and they're throwing out all these numbers for maintenance and things that they've heard, and a lot of it's just not true. And luckily, in my experience, it's pretty diverse. For example, on the Aprilia, did all the service myself. On the Panigale V4, I actually had the dealer service that bike. I've got invoices for tires, invoices for service, invoices for oil I bought on my own, oil filters, stuff like that. So let's talk about all the associated costs of one of these bikes, and hopefully that'll help you guys decide if you can afford one of these and if it's a good financial decision for you. So let's talk initial cost on the Panigale V4. Again, this is a 2023. I bought this bike brand new. So what I did, these are my actual numbers here. So this is what I paid for the bike out the door, $24,469. This bike was heavily discounted. I got a super good deal on this bike as well as on the RSV4. That's going to be a video coming up in the very near future, how to get a really good deal on just a motorcycle in general, but especially on these bikes that are a little bit more expensive. That is going to be coming up, so look out for that. But these are my actual numbers. Okay, so as we could see, MSRP on a 2023 Panigale V4 is $24,495. Unfortunately, for the 2024 model year Panigale V4s, they actually went up another $500, even though they're the same exact bike. But in my case, 2023, $24,495. You can see here at the particular dealership that I bought the bike from, prep was $299, which is really cheap. Normally you see prep fees on Ducati Panigales right around $700 to $900 typically. I've seen there's a local dealer in town for me that charges $500 for a prep fee. That's pretty good, but most places are going to be more. Freight, $795. That's going to be the same no matter where you go. That's just a Ducati freight charge. Document fee, $85 on this particular bike. That's going to vary across the board. Registration, $353.50. Again, that's going to vary as well depending on where you live. Total cost for this bike without tax, $26,027.50. I got a $3,498 discount on this bike, and my out the door price with tax, so everything included, $24,469. So basically I got the bike out the door, tax, freight, prep, document fee, registration, for less than what the MSRP on one of these bikes is supposed to cost. So if you guys want to learn how to get a deal like this, look out for that next video coming up. But that's what I paid for this bike, $24,469. Since I know there's going to be some people who don't believe me, here is my actual invoice for the Panigale V4, and you can see here total cost $24,469. That's what I paid out the door for the bike. None of it was financed. That's just what I paid. I've seen full-blown retail invoices for Panigale V4s over $29,000. What about the maintenance? So for this bike, I decided to have the dealer do the first service. This is my actual invoice from that first service. And you can see here, if you want to take a screenshot or pause, you can see everything that was included with this first service. But let's look at the part breakdown and labor breakdown. So you can see total cost with tax, $393.89. So honestly, pretty on par with first service on any motorcycle. Pretty much any motorcycle, well, most motorcycles, their first service, it's gonna be about $400. It usually involves an oil change, checking and adjusting the chain, retorquing all the important bolts, plugging into the diagnostic system to run any updates, make sure there's no pending check engine lights and stuff like that. It's gonna be pretty standard for most motorcycles. So with this Ducati, we can see the type of oil that they use. They use the Shell Advanced Ducati Oil 1550, $17.99 a quart. I mean, not outrageous, not out of this world. Oil filter, $31.99. They needed an O-ring and a washer, so what is that, $32, $36, $38 pretty much. I mean, really not too bad. And honestly, if you shop around a little bit, call around other dealers, you may be able to find your first service a little bit cheaper. I just decided to go to the dealer that I normally have all my recalls done and stuff like that. They tend to do a pretty good job. They're pretty honest there. So that's just where I go. I don't shop around too much. Whatever it costs there, that's just what I do. But yeah, maintenance, it's not, $400 is not nothing, but it's going to be the same for almost any bike pretty much. Now I'm getting ready to move these Marcassini forged wheels from my old V2 onto the V4. The base V4s we know come with the cast Enki wheels. Just never really been much of a fan of the design on these, and of course they're going to be a little bit heavier than the forged ones, but I'm moving these forged wheels over to the V4. Tire on the Marcassinis is a little old. Supposedly if the tires are stored properly, you're okay, over 5 years, but I just want peace of mind. I just want to put new tires on it. So I've got an invoice here from the dealer that I normally use, and we can see a set of tires for these bikes. I'm getting some Rosso 4s. They are $626. Supposedly the dealer gave me a little discount on the tires here. I'm sure that they did. It was supposed to be about 150 bucks off just because I have a good relationship with them. But you could see set of tires for these bikes, 626 bucks. Let's look at the tire wear so far. So these are super courses. These are going to wear a little bit quicker than some Rosso 4s. But you can see I've got 1,100 miles. I don't ride my bike crazy or anything like that. I don't want to. Yeah, you guys talk about my chicken strips, whatever. I don't care. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get in a crash or hurt somebody else. So I just chill. But with 1,100 miles, the tire pretty much looks brand new. Even super courses can last quite some time. Just so you guys know, on bikes like these, you generally replace the rear tire with about twice as much frequency as the front tire. But let's just take worst case scenario. So let's say every 4,000 miles, you're replacing both front and rear tire. In my case, $622 for both front and rear. 622 divided by 4,000 miles, you're paying about 15.5 cents per mile just for tires. Now, what about fuel economy? Here in California, gas is ridiculously expensive. So let's see what kind of fuel economy I've been getting. There you see, 33 miles a gallon, so not too bad. Like most motorcycles, these bikes take premium fuel, so either 93 or 91 octane. Here in California, 91 octane is about $5 a gallon right now. So if we take $5 per gallon divided by 33 miles per gallon, we get 15 cents. So about 15 cents per mile for fuel. Let's talk Aprilia. Man, I love this bike so much. It's like driving a muscle car pretty much, but this Aprilia, it's a 2023. I bought it back in January of this year, so it was technically one model year old, just like the same situation with the Panigale V4. And these are my numbers for the Aprilia. So you can see MSRP, $18,999 for this bike. Freight, $650, prep, $625, manufacturer surcharge, $150. I think a lot of dealers, they work the freight and surcharge into one cost, but it all works out to be the same. Dock fee, $85, registration, $307. So that brought me to $20,816, not including tax. On this bike, I got a discount, $3,385. So my out the door price, tax, registration, bike, everything, $19,100. So we can see very similar to the deal that I got with the Panigale V4, where my out the door price was very similar to the manufacturer's just MSRP. On the RSV4, I've actually done all the maintenance myself on it. What I did was I bought the shop manual from AF1 Racing. That shop manual is about $20. I'll provide a link down in the comments there, so it's easy to find, but well worth it. It has all the torque specs and everything. The oil I normally get from Amazon, that's usually the cheapest place that I found. Normally I get a pack of 6 quarts of that Casual 1050 for 60 bucks on Amazon. Then the filters actually come in a 2-pack from AF1 Racing. You get 2 filters for $18. So basically, even with the shop manual included, you can do an oil change on this bike for 100 bucks. So filter, actually 2 filters, the oil and the shop manual, you're still 100 bucks to change the oil on one of these. So not bad at all. And with that shop manual, you'll be able to know what all the torque specs are for everything. So you can make sure you put a torque wrench on all your caliper bolts and everything, double check everything, which honestly, I kind of recommend you doing it yourself, because that way you know it got done. If you take it to a dealer, you don't really know if they torqued all those bolts. I'd like to think the best of people, I think most of the time they do, but you don't really know that they did it. Whereas if you do it yourself, you'll know that you touched every bolt that was supposed to be touched on it and the torque is correct. Fuel mileage on the Aprilia, I think it's gonna be a little bit worse here, but let's take a look. So, let's see, average fuel, if you guys can see that. Probably not, I know the glare is horrific, but it does say 28 miles per gallon on that. I use the RSV4 for a similar purpose as the V4. I mean, a little bit of recreational riding, but for the most part, I try to use these bikes for actual transportation. It makes it a little bit more affordable to own them when you use them for useful purposes, like going to the store, going to work, going to the bank, going to, you know, friend's house or whatever. There's nothing wrong with this, but if you use your motorcycle just for recreational purposes and don't use it for normal tasks like errands and going to work and stuff like that, then it makes your cost quite a bit more expensive, because that means to do those mundane errands, you are using another form of transportation to get you to those places. So it's almost like paying double. Let's talk about insurance rates real quick. So for all 3 bikes, $360 for insurance. I am using State Farm with a $1,000 deductible for all those bikes. So if something were to happen, the deductible is higher, but the premium itself is relatively low. So the breakdown on that 360 is $110 for the Panigale V2. It's $120 for the RSV4, and it's $130 for the Panigale V4. My suggestion for insurance is just like anything else, shop around, see who's gonna give you the best rate for the amount of coverage they're going to give you, and then take it from there. So on the Panigale V4, $130 per month times 12, $1,560 for insurance for the entire year for that bike. So if we take that $1,560 premium divided by 3,000 miles, works out to 52 cents a mile for insurance. Same math on the RSV4 would be 48 cents per mile, and the same math on the V2 would be 44 cents per mile. Now, when you increase your estimated mileage on your policy, so for me, I'm using 3,000 miles for my estimated mileage for each motorcycle. So if I were to go up to 5,000 miles, estimated mileage per year, then the premium would go up, but it would make the per mile cost for insurance go down. So keep that in mind, you guys. It goes back to my point earlier. If you use these bikes for normal uses, for just transportation, then your per mileage cost, it does go down. Let's talk modifications. I can't go through every single modification that there is for these bikes, but let's take a few examples to just see if this will work for you. On these types of bikes, I mean, you can literally spend tens of thousands of dollars on just parts for these bikes, and pretty quickly too. It doesn't take much when the parts cost this much, but let's look at a few examples so you guys can work it into your budget.
By now, we've all heard the horror stories about Ducati aftermarket parts, such as this Akrapovic wheelbarrow exhaust, which is $8,200. And that's not all. There's the Terminoni full exhaust with the 4 exits. It's $5,479 for that exhaust. These Light Tech rear sets are very popular. They're $1,201. There's also these Moto Course rear sets that are $1,664. I will say, despite the cost, there's some very, very cool parts for Ducatis. If you look at these Moto Course crankcase covers, $2,334, but very cool, very unique. You don't see those parts for any other bikes. They even make cool brake reservoirs for these bikes, but they're $380. You want a really cool kickstand for a Panigale V4? That's available too, but it's $540. And last but not least, those Rizoma stealth mirrors that you see on almost every Panigale V4, yeah, those are 500 bucks. Aprilia parts are still quite expensive. However, they're a lot more reasonable than the equivalent parts for Ducati. I will say that there are less parts for Aprilias though, so you're not going to find as many cool niche parts for an Aprilia as you would a Ducati. Remember those Light Tech rear sets from earlier that were $1,200 for Panigale V4s? The equivalent rear sets from Light Tech are $900 for the RSV4. Same story with exhaust systems. So a full exhaust for an RSV4, like an SC Project SC1R, $3,300. When we look at compared to Ducati, which are $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 even, much cheaper. There's also some really nice slip-on options for Aprilias, like the Race Fit system. That's $675 for that.
That being said, here's my numbers for the Panigale V4. These are absolute worst case scenario. The V4 has the highest insurance rates. I'm factoring in changing both front and rear tires every 4,000 miles. In reality, you should really only have to change the rear tire, typically. I've got the registration factored in, maintenance factored in. So maintenance is also worst case scenario too. So with these bikes, just like most others, the maintenance schedule is either by time or by mileage. I never hit the mileage mark. I always hit the time mark, meaning a year passes before I hit the recommended service interval from Ducati. Now, this doesn't factor in depreciation and stuff like that. These are just the running costs for this bike based on 3,000 miles per year. And you could see as a total, $1.06 per mile for one of these bikes. So now if you're paying interest and you're rolling in depreciation and stuff like that, well then that would all be added in. But I just wanted to give you guys the running costs itself, because there's so many other, even within these prices here, there's going to be variance as well. I've had people comment to me that their first service was actually $600. I've had some people say theirs was $380. So there's a little bit of variance always, but because of how interest rates are and your financial situation, those other factors are really, too hard to calculate. I just want to give you guys the cost for maintenance, tires, insurance, fuel, registrations. You can get kind of an idea if one of these bikes would work for you. And as you guys could see, they're about $1 per mile for those things. Now there's kind of what I would call the X factor here, and that's if anything just kind of unfortunate or weird happens to your bike. So luckily I've never had my V2 or my RS V4 damaged, but in a short amount of time, actually on the same day, my Panigale V4 was damaged 2 separate times, and the damage was not enough to file an insurance claim, but it still required me to come out of pocket to replace a few things. So basically what happened is I went to Cars and Coffee one morning with a buddy, and this happened.
while we were there. Hope you guys can see it, but you can see just this little bit of damage here on the winglet. Not a huge deal, but that definitely was not there before I got to Cars and Coffee. Later on that same day, I used the V4 to do some errands. I was at the grocery store and this happened to the winglet. It was actually much worse earlier. There was a lot of paint transfer on here, so I don't know if somebody hit this with their car or what happened, but this winglet got damaged. There is this as well, and then there was when I had the stock mirror, there was a little bit of a scratch on the mirror head. So not enough to file an insurance claim. I can deal with the one winglet having that little chip on it. I can deal with the other winglet, you know, having that kind of light scratch across it. I'll probably replace it with some carbon ones in the future anyway. So not the end of the world, but if it had been worse, then I would have had to replace that winglet. The mirror, I ended up replacing anyway because I put bar ends on it. But if that were not my plan, I would have had to come out of pocket for that mirror. The lever, I'm gonna change the levers as well, so that's not a big deal. But if I wasn't, I'd be coming out of pocket for a lever as well. So what I did was I looked on Parts Fish to see how much each of those parts cost, and here they are. I've got the part number there as well, so that way, if you guys are curious, you can look it up for yourself. But as you guys can see, lever $172, mirror $319, and the wings are $208 each. Both of my winglets got damaged that day, so I times 2 that. So you can see $907 there in damage, not including labor. So that's something to think about as well, is the parts, the OEM parts for these bikes are really expensive. So if anything dumb happens like that, like somebody backs into the bike or you just lay it down or whatever, somebody's walking by and scratches a fairing, keep that in mind that these parts are super expensive. So it's something to consider. Things like this don't happen that often. Like I said, I've never had my V2 or my RS V4 damaged ever, but for whatever reason, just that one day, the V4 sustained, you know, basically 2 separate events of damage on the single day. Just out of curiosity, I looked up how much the upper fairing costs on one of these Panigale V4s. $752 for that upper fairing. It doesn't include any of the fasteners or the wing or anything. So if that upper fairing would have got scratched, just right there, $750 in cost plus the labor. So I hope that was helpful today. Just seeing the raw numbers, you guys can decide if this is something you can actually afford. I see a lot of people talking about these bikes from a position of, you know, basically not knowing anything about these motorcycles, at least in their current form. In the past, yeah, they were super expensive to maintain because of the dry clutches and the timing belts and stuff like that. But now their intervals are super long. The wet clutch is actually not even on the Ducati service interval anymore. So doesn't mean that these bikes are cheap to own, not by any means. As you guys saw, just not including depreciation and initial cost, it's over $1 a mile for me to run either of these bikes. But when people say, you know, hey, you'll like basically go broke owning a Ducati or an Aprilia, that's just not really true. I think, again, in the past, I think there was a little more truth to that because those bikes had a lot more issues and they were a lot more finicky. But you know, now they're much better, but there are some little things you need to look out for, like the OEM part costs and stuff like that. If you have a tip over or somebody damages the bike, I mean, we've all seen that where these exotic bikes, they kind of get targeted and people push them over and stuff like that, and maybe it's not enough damage to warrant a insurance claim. Then you have to factor that in as well, because things happen, right? It's unfortunate, but things happen. So if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. If you can, please like, please subscribe, helps me out quite a bit. Gonna be a lot more coming, but really hope this channel is helpful to you guys. 99% of the comments out there are positive, so I'm glad that I'm making a difference in this community. But if you guys have suggestions on what you want to see next, please let me know. All comments are considered. I read every last one of them. So until next time, we'll see you on the next one.